Please be seated. Our program will begin momentarily. Please welcome the former governor of the state of Colorado, Bill Ritter.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. Probably like a lot of you, I was sitting through the plenary session this morning, and there's a lot of great conversations, great folks presenting, and some really important information. This is a sub-part of the conversation that we were having over the last day and a half about climate change, and it's something that gets discussed a lot less, but obviously is necessary, and right now there are events around the globe, I think, that demonstrate the necessity of having this conversation about resilience. I'm your moderator today. I won't speak a lot or much, but I have the opportunity here and really the privilege of introducing some phenomenal people from around the globe who are doing a variety of things as they relate to resilience. So our first speaker is someone pretty close to here, close to home, and we're going to now hear from the county supervisor for Sonoma County. Would you please welcome Jim Gore?
Thank you, Governor Ritter. It's a pleasure to see you all today. It's a quick time. We go through this stuff rapidly, but at the same time, I want to invite you on a journey, a rapid-fire journey into the heart of the most catastrophic wildfire in California's history. Last year, on October 8th, 2017, we were hit right in the face by not just a fire, but let's be real, it was a catastrophic climate event. 60-mile-an-hour winds on the fire line, 100-mile-an-hour winds peaking up in the hills, a fire that moved so fast that a similar fire back in the 40s took 3 days to travel the same distance that this took 6 hours. It caught us off guard. And what we're all about is not just coming back to where we were before those fires, but coming back stronger, better, more resilient, ready to go, looking at our community and saying, it's go time. As much as I'm a district supervisor in Sonoma County, in a place that lost 5,300 homes and 2,400 in my district, I'm also a father. And I got to look at my kids just like all of you and say, we refuse to subject them to a pessimistic future. And that's why we're here today. So real quickly, even though I'm the chair of the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, I'm also the head of the National Association of Counties and the California State Association of Counties Resilient Counties Initiatives. What that allows me to do is take kind of a vision of what we're doing locally and try and expose it and take it nationally. Since my clicker's not working, I'm just going to go for it with you guys. And I don't know if there's anybody in the back who would like to try and help me out for the last 2 minutes, but there we go. There's the first one. So this is trial by fire, flooding, and drought. If you can look at this, I don't want you to read all the text. Come on. But realistically, up here, with less than 9 inches of rain, the 2013-14 rain season went down as the driest year ever in Sonoma County's history. We started recording rainfall in 1903. Look down here at the bottom, with more than 58 inches of rain 3 years later. The 2016-17 rain season went down as the wettest year ever recorded in those same areas. Now let me switch up here, catastrophic drought. we switch back. If you can go back one slide real quickly, sir. December, flash flooding, then warnings about fire season, then a catastrophic fire, then high wind and flooding, wildfire. Here we go into more flooding, underwater, record-breaking heat, and then the worst catastrophic wildfire in California's history. Next slide, please. This is our new reality. And it's a chaotic, crazy time that if you think about this happened in Sonoma County, but if you expose it and writ large, you'll see all of these crazy things. You'll look below you and see that there were 100,000 people displaced. We had 100,000 acres destroyed. We had fire tornadoes coming down, launching cars into the air. It was a crazy time. Next slide, please. What it did to our community is it didn't just burn out these houses, it took us and put us into a sense of defense for the first time in many years. We pride ourselves on being climate change combatants via sustainability, clean water initiative, right? Clean energy initiatives, community choice aggregation, getting ahead of everything. But this changed everything. This left us the morning we woke up with too many visions of what you see before you. Just over on this court over here was my cousin's house. Just down the block, my stepsister's house. They lived with us for months after these disasters. But it's not just about Sonoma County. Up here on top, you see, in total, 813 counties out of 3,090. A full quarter of the counties in the United States were under federal disaster declaration last year. Dare I say, that means it's not a disaster anymore, ladies and gentlemen. It is the new normal. Thank you, Jerry Brown. 45% of all local health departments responded to at least one all-hazards event in 2016. More than $16 billion loss plus emergencies throughout the entire country. This is a crazy time. But is it an end of days? Not at all. Because what do we got? Think global, act local. Sonoma County Climate Resilience Team, carbon-free water, energy independence program, climate protection campaign with a White House Champion Award. We have advanced quantitative precipitation for forecasting for atmospheric rivers. We have weather balloons going out into Sonoma County. We have a new government office focused on government resilience, and we are taking this moment by moment, not just as a government, but as individuals, preparing our communities through citizens organizing to prepare for emergencies, CERT teams, and other things so that they can be resilient in the face of what is to come. A lot more of this is going to happen, but what this is the perfect example of is that we have this whole chain of climate change, but we only get to own our link. And so my message to you all, own your link, and own it, as they say in Spanish, con ganas, right? Own it big, and do what you can, and transpose it and move it to different areas. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce Henk Ovink, Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, Kingdom of the Netherlands. Come on up here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining. It's resiliency time this afternoon. Great that you're here. I have the same, I actually asked if the clicker works, but there's a green button on the clicker and it doesn't work. Yeah? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Resiliency. Resiliency in presentations as much as in real life. This is what we're talking about. It's our planet. And we've listened this morning that this one's not in danger, it's us that live on the planet. So we have to think about that danger to come up with best solutions. 90% of all disasters are water-related. 40% of our world's population at risk because of too much and too little water. 15% of our economy is eaten away with water-related disasters, and half of our aquifers, the vulnerable stuff we hold in the planet, is beyond the tipping point. So we are at risk, and climate change makes things worse. And if you look at floods, which are the is the top right of this slide, you see that every country has a flood. Floods are a very democratic thing. But then, if you look at who's impacted, you actually see that Asia is hit hardest. The vulnerable people of the world live in the most vulnerable places, and in Asia and in the Middle East and Africa, where floods and drought hit hardest, it's those vulnerable people that have the hardest time to get back on their feet. Causing migration crisis, 25 million people on the run right now, leading up to 250 million people on the run in 2050. That's 10% of the African continent. Imagine here in the US that 37 million people would be on the run. That's a challenge. That's the challenge the world is facing. But we have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. In their comprehensive approach, they can help us build a resilient future. And with the Paris Agreement and climate action, and we've been talking about climate action these days here in California, thanks to Governor Brown and all the people, we can build a better future. But then we have to change, because right now we are non-responsive. We repeat the mistakes of the past, leading to a more vulnerable world. If we have a disaster, like now Florence on your East Coast, at best we are reactive, so we build back. But we should not respond to the disasters of the past. We have to prepare ourselves for that future, become proactive, innovative, leapfrog, understand that future and take those risks into account in whatever we develop forward. And for that, water, and I'm a water ambassador, so I will talk about water, is critically important, because water connects the resiliency agenda across all. It's about health, it's about security, it's about equity, it's about innovation and urbanization and the environment. Water does not care about borders or boundaries. It connects across all. We had a high-level panel on water, chaired by the Secretary General of the UN and the President of the World Bank, with 11 presidents and heads of state. And we said we have to understand the complexity of that water much better, then value water across the board, environmentally, culturally, socially, as well as economic, and then manage it on every scale. And if we get to that value and management, that will lead us to a more resilient place. But that's not easy. It demands an approach that is a systems approach. And we like simple answers to very complex problems. And we like to simplify it, but it doesn't work. We have to look at the long term. We have to be comprehensive and connect that long term to short-term solutions. A plan without a project is nothing. It's a book on a shelf. Then again, a project without a plan becomes an incident and leads also to nothing. So the plan needs the project as much as the project needs the plan. And we have to do it in an inclusive way, including everyone and everything, to make sure that the vulnerable and the people on the ground are as much in a capacity to become resilient as the professionals and the politicians. It's the people on the ground that have the best information for years. They know why vulnerability means so much to them, and they can actually help inform and educate, empower the people that have to make the decisions. And transparency, critically important. We need to be accountable, we need to learn, and we need to leapfrog and build capacity institutionally as well as individually. Now, I come from the Netherlands, a kingdom that's both in the Caribbean as well as in Europe. A kingdom that's vulnerable, 26% below sea level, 60% flood-prone, and in the Caribbean, vulnerable last year when we had the hurricanes moving over. Now, we built our country out of water. Water is life in the Netherlands. But that did not start only by engineering and design and bigger dams and dikes. It started by collaboration. Collaboration, so critically important for resiliency. We started our democracy as a water democracy. In the 12th century, our first water authorities, still our fourth layer in government, a collaborative force helping to build resiliency across our country. We built projects on our rivers, opening them up, giving more room for the water to make our country more resilient in the face of climate change. On our coast, building with nature, protecting our coast and increasing the capacity to withhold storms. Storms that will occur every 10,000 years, so don't protect for the storms of the past. protect for the storms of the future, and build public space that actually can hold water in rain events and that are amazing places for education and recreation on a daily basis. We have a plan and a program and a commissioner that leads us the way. We protect the country, plan our cities, and are ready when a disaster hits. And that disaster hit last year in the Caribbean, when our kingdom, as so many of the other smaller islands in the Caribbean, were hit by these disasters. And we responded fast with an innovative approach and building resilience with the communities. Those projects and those innovations we have to capture. We have to capture, replicate, and scale up to the world, because that type of capacity is needed everywhere. I had the honor to serve on President Obama's Hurricane Sandy task force and developed Rebuild by Design, a competition that spurred innovation and brought resiliency capacity to all those communities at risk. We scaled it up to the nation with a national disaster resiliency competition, and did it here in the Bay Area, Resilient by Design, delivering amazing projects in the last year. We, the Netherlands, used that example, that challenge, to scale it up back to the region with a new study called Too Little and Too Much, looking at the regional vulnerabilities and its opportunities, adding up the numbers of people, population growth, infrastructure demand, housing demand, in the context of the water crisis, and taking those problems into actions leading to the benefits. Those benefits are now becoming an agenda for a more resilient bay. The same we do in Asia. I just returned from Chennai and Semarang for a Water as Leverage challenge in 3 cities where those hotspots of climate vulnerability all add up. These 3 cities are an example how we can work with everyone and everything on the ground, bottom up, for a more innovative approach. We have no time to waste when it comes to resiliency. We have to act now. To act now to safeguard our place on this beautiful planet. I wrote a book on my work and the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy for President Obama, and it's called Too Big. Climate change is our biggest challenge ever. It's too big to ignore. The complexity we need to embrace, it is too big to simplify. It's too big for our systems, so we have to do this in a safe way, a place to build trust. It's too big to go alone, we have to be inclusive, and it's too big to fragment. It needs the power of design, the power of planning, and the power of resiliency to bring it all together. We have no time to waste, we have to act now, not for us, but for them. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Henk. And a lot of energy brought to bear on resilience. This is a pretty cool thing we're going to do next. We decided it was important as a part of this conversation to have a student perspective. So we invited a student from the University of Montana who's also a wildland firefighter. His name is Gore Beatty, and I'd ask you to welcome him to the stage, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gore Beatty, and I'm a former wildland firefighter, and now I study climate change at the University of Montana. Yesterday at the summit, I heard a number of people start off by acknowledging Indigenous people, so I'd like to do the same. Last weekend at the Climate March in Missoula, a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes spoke about his experience at a recent climate convention. What he was telling someone about how climate change impacts his community in Montana, the person responded, "So you're a Democrat?" He said, "No." He said, "So you're a Republican?" He said, "No." He said, "So you're an independent?" He said, "No, I'm a human being." This really stuck with me. Climate action is not polarizing, it's not partisan, it's a human issue. I know just how human and personal it can be from my experience working as a wildland firefighter. Over the course of 2 wildfire seasons, I ended up working on major wildfires across the West, including here in California. I would work 14-hour days on crews with more experienced wildfire personnel who would tell me that fires are getting more intense each year, and they'd say it's not a logging issue. They'd say not only have they never seen wildfires this intense, but they've also never seen the forest this dry. And here in California, you know that all too well. So I decided to take action. I took out as many student loans as I could get to learn about the biggest problem facing humanity, and especially my generation. Over the past few days, many businesses and community leaders have announced new emission reduction goals. These are a step in the right direction, but they are not enough. Leading climate scientist Dr. James Hansen explains the science in his peer-reviewed paper, Young People's Burden. The true safe global warming temperature that we need to get back to by 2100 is 0.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. There are real solutions we can take to fight climate change right now, but we need elected officials who make climate change a priority. I know personally how easy it feels to feel helpless in the face of what seems like such an impossible challenge. This year, there's a tangible thing that we can all do in the face of this problem, and we can vote. We must vote for candidates who will take a bold approach to solving the climate crisis. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm not an independent. I've seen the impacts of climate change firsthand. That's why I joined a campaign this year to tell my story and to urge young people to become climate voters this election. I'm excited to share this video with you that tells a bit about my story. Thank you. I've seen the impacts of climate change firsthand, and it's only going to get worse. But there's something we can do about it. My name is Gore, and ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to work with the natural environment. After high school, I got a job working as a Type 2 wildland firefighter, and I ended up battling some of the worst fires this country's ever seen. It was the hardest work I've ever done, and the most dangerous too. Some days I'd wake up to learn that one of my fellow firefighters didn't make it. Some of the older, more experienced firefighters would tell me that today's fires are way bigger and way more destructive than the fires that they've seen in the past. And the reason is climate change. As a result of climate change, fire season out here in the West is already 4 months longer than it was just 40 years ago. That's 4 more months each season that fire personnel have to put their lives on the line. And I just learned that in my lifetime, we're on track to lose half of all our forests out here in the West. Can you imagine that? The West without half of its forests? That's why this year, I'm a climate voter. Join me and pledge to vote now at beaclimatevoter.org.
Very good. So we'll follow that presentation in the video with an announcement. The announcement's going to be made by 2 people. So please welcome to the stage the following 2 folks. Lee Witt, she's the co-founder and partner of Blue Forest Conservation, and Lorenzo Bernasconi. He's the Senior Associate Director at the Rockefeller Foundation with an announcement on financing forest resilience. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lorenzo Bernasconi, and I couldn't be more proud to be here with you today to announce a first-of-a-kind investment product to reduce the frequency and intensity of forest fires. And I'm here very proud with standing next to Lee from the Blue Forest Conservation team, which has been behind this concept and working and persevering over the last 2.5 years with some support from us at the Rockefeller Foundation, where we run a grant and investment portfolio focused on innovation and finding new innovative products that can resolve and address the global sustainable development goals and the climate crisis. And for me, what's exciting about today's announcement is this is truly innovation in action. We all speak about the need for innovation. This is a remarkable team of best-in-class MBAs that have dedicated their careers to persevering in addressing the critical challenge that we just saw around forest fires. And so I'm extremely proud to hand it over to Lee to give you an overview of what the Forest Resilience Bond looks like. Thank you.
Thanks so much to the organizers for having us here today, and to Lorenzo and the Rockefeller Foundation for being leaders in the field of innovative finance. At Blue Forest, we are focused on financial innovation and how to use that to combat the wildfires that you just saw a great video about here in the Western US. And the reason why we're so focused on it is because wildfire seasons are getting longer and more severe every year. In fact, the Forest Service doesn't even call it a fire season anymore. It's the fire year. And the implications that that can have is people lose their lives, people lose their homes, but it's also air quality, water supply, rural economies, and habitat. And the reason why we are all here today is because we care about climate change. But you can't talk about climate change without also talking about wildfires. And that's because wildfires account for 1/5 of the global man-made carbon emissions. So we count on forests to be a carbon sink, but we really can't anymore. Forests are on their way to becoming a net emitter of carbon. So clearly something has to change, and that something is investing in forest resilience. We often think of environmental conservation as a cost, but in this case, investing in forest health is actually a proven benefit, not just to the environment, but to the bottom lines of electric utilities, water utilities, state and local governments, and the Forest Service, and more. And that's a really important distinction, because if we think of forest health not as a cost, but as a value, then we can redefine the fight against wildfires as an investment opportunity and attract a fresh and vast source of capital to a problem that is desperate for both. And that is our goal with the Forest Resilience Bond. At Blue Forest, we work with the Forest Service and the World Resources Institute, with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, to develop a new type of investment vehicle that leverages private capital to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration across the Western US. And I'm thrilled to say that that is no longer just a goal. It is a reality. This month, we are launching our first Forest Resilience Bond pilot project in the Tahoe National Forest, not too far from where we are today. And it will just the first of many Forest Resilience Bond projects to come. We've learned the hard way that public and philanthropic resources are not enough. So bringing private capital in and letting them help us build a more sustainable future really is the path. But we have to give private investors the tools. And the Forest Resilience Bond is now one of those tools. Thank you so much.
So we follow that with another very cool announcement, and we've got some folks who are elected officials here to make that announcement. We're honored today to have with us at this venue, he's been here at other venues this week, but Governor Jay Inslee from the state of Washington, and he's going to be joined by two mayors, the mayor of Portland, Oregon, Ted Wheeler, and the mayor of Vancouver, British Columbia, Gregor Robertson. So I'd ask Governor Inslee, Mayor Wheeler, Mayor Robertson to come on out. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Ritter, for your leadership now and in the past. People are still quoting Governor Ritter of Colorado, so I appreciate what you've done, Bill. Today, we get to make an announcement about protecting our people from the ravages of climate change. And we have had a Pacific Coast Collaborative doing some yeoman work up and down the Pacific Coast, across international boundaries, because we know we're all in this together, and we know that our people are at great risk. So today we are announcing the Pacific Coast Collaborative Resilience Initiative, which will make sure that our states work together to find every possible way to defend our people against the monster of climate change. And we know that they are at great risk. We all have our own nature of risk, but we're all unified against a common enemy. Our forest fires are raging across Washington State and British Columbia. And we know the science is that climate change would make those fires probably double in the western sides of the Cascades in the next century. We know that we are suffering losses today in our fishing and shellfish industry. So badly that in my part of the Salish Sea, we can't grow baby oysters because of the acidification of Puget Sound. We know that the blob and the ocean temperatures off the Pacific coast have prevented us from having a healthy fishing and salmon fishing season. And I've hated to see our beautiful fishing boats tied up at the docks without fishing this year. So we have jointly joined hands and shoulders and brains to try to find ways for our multiple agencies to protect people while this is happening. Now we know that defense is not enough. We're in other rooms, in other venues, and other measures playing offense. Because if we're going to really protect our people, we've got to stop climate change in its tracks by reducing carbon pollution. But while we are doing this, we owe our people a defense. And that's why we are defending against rising seas by hopefully this year creating a fund which will actually help people move who are threatened by the rising Pacific Oceans. We have low-lying towns and villages that are literally going to be swamped if we don't help them move their schools and their homes. We're helping doing research and development to see if there's a way that we can have local reduction of ocean acidification by using kelp and other biological means to increase the pH so the ocean acidification is not so dangerous. We're continuing to do the research necessary to try to protect the food chain from the destruction right at the bottom of the food chain with plankton, with calcium carbonate bodies that are so at risk to decreasing ocean pH. All of these things are necessary, and I'm proud to say that we're joining with 2 other states and 1 great province so we can be fighting these battles together. So thank you to my fellow colleagues. I've got to go run off to another event where we're going to beat climate change by eliminating carbon from our economy. I'm going to leave it to you 2 guys. Good luck, and thank you for helping out this collaborative. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ted Wheeler. I am the mayor of Portland, Oregon, and I'm here to speak from the local perspective. I want to start out by thanking California Governor Jerry Brown and the San Francisco Mayor London Breed for hosting this week's Global Climate Action Summit. It's been a fantastic summit. I particularly want to thank Governor Brown for his years of leadership on climate action and for working to inspire so many leaders all across the world to take up this important cause. Even as we work to mitigate the effects of climate change, we have to recognize the great impacts that have already been had on individuals and communities all across this planet. As such, the work on climate resiliency and effective urban planning has never been more important than it is right now. At the city level in Portland, we've undertaken and we're planning for ambitious actions that will help move this larger effort forward and support goals like those that are specifically outlined in the Pacific Coast Collaborative Commitment. Portland, as I'm sure many of you know, has been at the forefront of green infrastructure for many, many years. For example, our city council adopted policy that treats and slows down stormwater before it has an opportunity to reach our streams, our rivers, and our creeks. Our municipal government has also backed efforts that support green roofs in our city. For example, Portland's Central City 2035 plan, which was recently adopted by the City Council, outlines a requirement that green roofs must cover 100% of the roof. Developers can provide specific public amenities to reduce that coverage area by up to 40%. This requirement went into effect just this last July. Our Bureau of Environmental Services, in purchasing natural areas as both watershed and habitat environments, have also planted over 5,000 trees in the last year through our nonprofit partner, the Friends of Trees. These trees enhance our neighborhoods at the street and the canopy levels, and they also help manage stormwater. Finally, in 2017, my office led the development of a resolution that was unanimously adopted by our City Council that pledges 100% renewable energy sources for the City of Portland by the year 2050. At the same time that we're implementing these actions, programs, and strategies, we recognize the benefits of continuing to collaborate with our state and regional governments. Cooperation at all jurisdictional levels is absolutely critical. I want to close with an analogy. How many of you here have done an escape room? Quite a few people, probably most of you have kids like I do. Addressing and conquering global climate change is like an escape room. An escape room's a big room. There's lots of clues. You go in with a lot of people, and you cannot solve it alone. You must work collaboratively, and different people have different skill sets. Some people are good at puzzles, some people are good at riddles, some people are good at other types of exercises, and you work together, and you find your strength, and you solve the puzzle and the problem, and you escape the room. That's how we're going to address global climate change through the PCC Collaborative, by working together. And I could not be happier or more excited to stand here with my allies in this battle, all of you. So thank you for being here today and supporting our efforts to attack global climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Wheeler, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here to join us and talking about these next steps of the West Coast of North America working together in a very strong partnership on resilience. And change is impacting us dramatically up and down the coast right now. The cities, just to give you a little overarching frame here, the Pacific Coast Collaborative is California, Oregon, Washington, and BC, the province and states, and the big cities up and down our coast, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Oakland, and LA. We are the core partners of this Pacific Coast Collaborative, and we're seeing it's quite a remarkable shift. I think many of us on the West Coast of North America, we feel like we're a different country. We don't always relate to our federal governments, particularly now, but we have a lot in common. We have a lot of culture in common. We have an enormous amount of economic activity that we do up and down this coast. And that economic activity right now adds up to over $3 trillion. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, if we were to be a country. Well, so maybe see this as the next baby step in that direction. What do you think? Shall we? I think on behalf of the cities, we're game. Bring it.
Now the big announcement, right?
The big announcement. Well, my big announcement, I was thinking, hearing Governor Brown's big announcement downstairs, I thought, well, we could do a Canada arm to the California satellite and just sort of help. Sorry, that's a bad space joke. So we're committed, though, as cities and states and province to work together in an unprecedented way, given we're all facing very comparable challenges. The forest fire smoke in our cities this summer is like never before. Vancouver, we never had air quality alerts. We've been very proud to be, if not number one of the top couple cities in the world for air quality. This summer, we have had 18 days with severe air quality alerts, which is unheard of in Vancouver, and that's the rainforest around the city burning. So we're in a whole new paradigm that is frightening, frankly, and it's having an impact on our city. It will affect our economy very directly. And we didn't even build this into the climate adaptation that we did just several years ago. In 2014, we advanced our unprecedented climate adaptation plan. We didn't realize that forest fire smoke was going to be devastating to the city in the summers. So we're seeing the change accelerate way beyond what we would have thought in recent years. We're going to need new levels of collaboration, and super exciting to be able to work between our cities, between states and provinces, irrespective of what our national leaders do or frankly don't do. We need to take this on ourselves. So work with us. Look forward to a lot more partnership and collaboration as we take on climate change, take on the great opportunities for this part of the world to lead the whole world in creating opportunity and adjusting to all of the challenges of climate change, doing it well and sharing all that we learn with regions around the world. So thanks for your partnership. Let's do it.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. You do now. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor. See you. Thank you to the mayors and the governor. Another announcement. This comes from James Lee Witt. He is the CEO of Witt Global Partners. Mr. Witt.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Well, thanks for giving me a little bit of your time today, and I know everybody's probably getting tired since it's Friday, And thank goodness I'm not the last one you're going to get to hear. But you know, when I was director of FEMA for 8 years under President Clinton and spent all those times in Washington, D.C., and I was there 19 years. But during the 8 years, we responded to 340 presidential disaster declarations. Everything from earthquakes to wildfires, mudslides, hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. The only thing I didn't do was to respond to locusts. Didn't have that opportunity. But during that time, mitigation was the cornerstone of everything that we did, because it was just ridiculous what was happening in our cities and counties and our states around the country at that time. And the pain and the anguish that people went through of losing everything they'd worked all their life for. So I decided in 1997 that I was going to start a different program. And I asked Congress for $25 million to start this program, and they actually gave it to me. So we started out with 7 pilot communities, and the program was called Project Impact. And it was the very first public-private partnership program in the federal government. We would select 7 cities that had the high risk, from earthquake to wildfire to floods to tornadoes. And in 2000, when I was leaving, we had 250 cities in this program, making cities and counties more resilient than they ever had been before. All the floods that we went through, the 93 flood, it bothered me so much that we had to do something different. 9 states on the Mississippi River was affected the ecosystem. And so I asked the president, and he allowed me to start a volunteer buyout relocation program. Missouri alone, we bought out 4,000 pieces of property. We bought out several thousand pieces of property, turned all of that space into open green space, and deed restricted it. In Iowa, the state of Iowa and the Game and Fish of Iowa, all of that property, they went in there and planted it back in the native flowers and grass. And the ecosystem changed in 2 years. So carbon emissions is important, clean energy is important, but where we build and how we build is equally important. And so when President Bush came in, he canceled this program. So what we're doing is relaunching this program. And in California, with the National Association of Counties, we're announcing that we're going to select 10 cities, that we're going to be the advisor and also help them build a public-private partnership to make their counties more resilient. So we're hoping to take this program nationwide so that we can have better and safer cities in the future. We have to break the damage repair cycle that we continue to see. And look at Florence right now today. Well, I'm going to shut up, and I know you're probably glad, but I'm going to leave. Finally, I'm going to leave this with you, and you remember this. When I lived in Virginia, I lived in D.C. 19 years, and I started a company and built a worldwide company and sold it and moved back to Arkansas. But I was on the board of the John Leland Seminary School, and we were having a fundraiser at this board member's home one night, and there was a Baptist minister from Argentina there. And he said, if we're not part of planting the trees of the future, we do not deserve the honor of standing in the shade of the trees of the past. We have a lot of trees to plant. So God bless you. Thank you for what you're doing.
So our next presentation is actually going to be a panel. We have 4 panelists. If the panel want to come on stage and just stand there while they're lining up the chairs, then it'd help me introduce you. So we all are here because we believe that climate resilience is a really big and important topic. It requires changing both what we are planning for, and there's nothing like the events of this week and this day that tell us we have to plan for something different. So it's what we're planning for. The past can't be the guide for future climate resilience planning, but it also requires to change how we do our work. moving to do more just, flexible, and adaptive systems that account for the complex interactions between society, the economy, and the environment, as framed by Hink. Given the diversity of our panel here, let's discuss how each of you defines resilience when we finally sit down. And before that, let me introduce all of you. So first, we have Agnes Lena. She's the Executive Director and founder of Aramatuk Community Concerns. She's from Kenya. And we're going to hear about her work in Kenya. And it's a fantastic opportunity for us to hear that and to have you join us. We have the Lieutenant Governor from the state of Alaska, Brian Mallett, who will talk about the work that he and his boss and others in the administration have been doing over the past couple of years on climate, on resilience, and just that ongoing work in a state. We're also fortunate to be joined by Tosi Impanyu. He is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's the former African Group and Least Developed Country Chair. So thank you for joining us as well, Tosi. It's fantastic as well. And then finally, we're going to be joined by Mark Ghilarducci. Nobody's name today was easy.
It's easy.
Yours was the
that
easiest.
Was good.
You know? Mark Ghilarducci, he is the Director of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services for the state of California. And what a job you have as well, Mark. So let's all take our seats. I'm going to sit in this one right here. And Agnes, if you can just kind of slip over there. There you go. And we'll start the work. So we're going to just go down the row and do these in the order that you're seating. And the way they've scripted this is for us to do one question and kind of a 1 4-minute answer. But if the answer goes a little short and there's time for some exchange, we'll try and do that as well. If the audience has some questions and we have time at the end, we could even do some audience Q&A without a microphone. You'll have to come up, but that might be interesting as well. So Agnes, in your work with pastoralists in Kenya, you focus on empowering women as participants in elective political leadership and decision-making. So why don't you tell the audience why you think political action and engagement is so critical to climate adaptation and resilience?
Thank you very much, Governor, and all protocol observed, and good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, actually. First of all, it's very important to know that politicians can become gatekeepers in everything that you do. So sometimes it's important that you bring them on board. Sometimes they say, actually, if you cannot beat them, you join them. So that's the approach that we want to use. Because sometimes if you bypass them, they'll ask you, okay, who asked you to come to my constituency and do a resilient project without telling me? So we actually train political leaders so that we can have the political goodwill to do our projects, resilient projects. Pastoralist women really suffer a lot. They contribute nothing, you all know, to climate change, but they're the ones who suffer most. And they're the ones who have the knowledge. They stay in the, you cannot destroy the forest that you depend on for food, for medicine, for everything that you want. You definitely are going to be the first one to be able to protect it. But no one knows that. You need policies, you need guidelines, you need standards to be able to move forward. And all that you cannot get without politicians. You need them to pass those policies, you need them to pass those guidelines, you need them to pass those standards for you to be able to do resilient projects, or even what we call non-climate dependent livelihoods. Like the beads that I'm wearing, this is non-climate dependent, and it's the women who do all this work. And we need policies in place for us to be able to move forward with all these projects. And we cannot move forward unless we have the goodwill from the politicians. We need them on board.
So I am going to do a little bit of a follow-up. I understand sort of working with pastoralists, you've also focused a lot on working with women.
Yeah.
And in very many parts of lesser developed countries, that's an important component of the economy and really of the social structure. Just talk a little bit about that, would you, before we move to our next speaker?
The structure?
Yeah, why women? Why you work with women?
Because women are the most affected by climate change. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And then we always say that women are the nurturers of society. Women are the ones who will fetch water for you to have food in the house. They will be the ones who will bring firewood for you to cook the food that you have in the house. And they're the ones who will walk kilometers and kilometers in order to fetch the water and everything that they do. And they have so much passion for the work they do. They're the nurturers of society. And even animals, because as pastoralists, it's not just about human beings, it's also about the animals that we care for. And especially now with climate change, the animals are becoming fewer and fewer. With drought, the food, the livelihood is actually shrinking. And the land is also shrinking. So definitely we need policies on land because of the women, so that the women can survive. Otherwise, the women, as the ones who are actually the nurturers of this society, if they do not take these roles, and if there's no leadership about women, nothing about us without us, and we cannot continue.
That's fantastic. I suspect there are a lot of people in this audience that would listen to you for a very long time if we had more time, and I apologize we don't, but that was fantastic, so thank you. So, Lieutenant Governor, tribal and indigenous communities from Alaska and across the globe have been stewards of land and water since time immemorial. Tribal climate action often contains the distillation of data and knowledge stretching back thousands of years. A little bit about what Agnes was just saying about how being so close to nature gives you really your own data bank. You're Lieutenant Governor of Alaska, where you serve as the chair of the state's climate change initiative. You're also a Tlingit Indian and a member of the Raven tribe. How is the state integrating a range of perspectives to enhance resilience and specific to indigenous people in Alaska? What kinds of things are you doing that are particular about them?
Would you repeat that, please?
I would absolutely. Did you see the deal with the indigenous people this morning on stage in the plenary? There were a couple of things that happened this morning, maybe late this morning, maybe a little bit into the afternoon. They were just really moving with indigenous people. So, and you actually being one of them and in elective office gives you a really unique perspective.
When I was a little boy, my Tlingit mother in our small village right in the Gulf of Alaska, part of the North Pacific Ocean, an area where weather is created, an area that now is feeling the effects of climate change, and we are living those effects. When the federal government backed away from implementing the Paris Accords, at least in the current time, Governor Walker and I knew that the state needed to act, not that the state did not need to act on a continual basis, but that we needed to take particular initiative. I stammered until I was 30. Did you know that? No, you didn't know that.
I didn't.
And so I stumble on words from time to time. And most people say, hey, that guy's thoughtful because he stopped speaking and thinks about it. and what I'm usually doing is looking for a substitute word. I was in, and my wife is an Athabascan Indian from the interior of our state, the first of her siblings to get a college degree and spent 20 years teaching in Alaska. Alaska is made up of a very diverse population, but some, depending upon whose data you use, 18 to 20% are the indigenous people of that land. It's also a small state in terms of population, 730,000 people, roughly the size of a medium-sized city anyplace else in our country. But it's a huge land. It would be another country if we were not a state. And we think about that from time to time. I was in I'm lieutenant governor for all of the people of our state, and I take that obligation seriously, obviously. But when I think about resiliency, when I think about what is the end state that might bring us to, and I thought about it, I recall a conversation I had in Hawaii last year with Native Hawaiians on this subject. And one of them, their leaders, in a momentary lapse into despair, said, "Why save the planet when we're where we are? Why save the planet if we don't create equality and justice and fairness and equity for all of the people of the world?" The lives of indigenous people in many ways has been one that we know very well. And it lives today. If it doesn't live in our present reality, it certainly lives in our minds, it lives in our psyches, it lives in our cultures, it lives in the way that we relate in our worldview to the rest of humanity. If we are ultimately to be a resilient peoples of the world, the ultimate resilience to me is that we both save our planet, but we also save ourselves. That we, in the process of having to collaborate, of having to work together, of having to come together, of recognizing for the first time maybe outside of armed conflict that everyone has a stake in our future, every single person. That could create a space for us to consciously rebuild, think about who we are as peoples of the world and how we relate to and work with and how we treat with one another. And in saving the planet, say to one another in a collective way and bring it into our consciousness. The resilience we must have is to make every step on this perilous journey, but also one fraught with opportunity to reshape our world, not just in the ways that we typically describe it in the climate change space, but in the way we treat with one another as peoples of the world. That's resilience. In Alaska, our effort is focused that way. We want every voice to be heard. We want for every person, community, neighborhood, belief, value, even ideology, to be able to be voiced in the context of moving ahead together as opposed to dividing us as peoples. When we begin to divide one another, the weak and the helpless are trampled under. We can change that in this space. We, in the process of reclaiming and reshaping, making our climate habitable and healthy and rich and sustainable for all of the world's children, can begin now with the urgency we feel, with the critical need to come together on a global scale, to make a key part of our climate change action the bringing together of peoples such that, as I said, we are seeking in Alaska, no one left behind.
Thank you. I'm going to have to make sure we get the other speakers in, but thank you very much. It was fantastic. Mr. Mpandu, I think with your work, you take something that the Lieutenant Governor said, really about the globe, but specific in some respects to Alaska, and you've done this with the least developed countries. This morning, I think it was the former Vice President Gore who said, one of the problems with climate change is the worst effects are visited upon, and the first effects are visited upon people who weren't responsible for this. And that's partly what I think Agnes was referring to as well. So if you want to tell us about your work and really the work around resilience with least developed countries, why this group exists, and what their viewpoint is about how they take on this challenge.
Thank you, Bill. And I must say that I was very moved by Lieutenant Governor's narrative and what he said about the plight of his indigenous people. We do have indigenous people also in many of the LDCs. So people have to understand that the 47 least developed countries are the poorest countries on the planet. They're the ones who have the lowest per capita income. They're the ones who have the lowest human development index. So those countries are struggling with development, and runaway climate change, unfortunately, exacerbates some of the difficulties that we have. So we found ourselves in a situation where we could play the blaming game, saying that we did not create this climate change conundrum, we are victims, or we could be proactive. The LDC group has decided to be proactive and show leadership. And to do so, we realized that we had to meet 3 goals, which were poverty reduction, sustainable development goals, and in line with the Paris Agreement, low emission development, which is resilient to the negative effect of climate change. We looked at the landscape of climate endeavors, realized that there was a galaxy of initiatives, but it seems like LDCs were falling in the cracks of those overlapping initiatives. We also looked at climate finance. We saw the good things private sector started to do. We saw the public financing, and we find ourselves in a situation where we were part of the equation as regards the supply side of the finance has been resolved. What do we do on the demand side? Therefore, we decided to launch 2 initiatives, one which is called RAY, the other one which is called Life AR. So I often try to play with words by saying it's a ray of life. RAY is the Renewable Energy Initiative and Energy Efficiency for least developed countries. And LIFE is actually the least developed countries initiative for effective adaptation and resilient development. Both initiatives have been launched under the able leadership of Ethiopia, who's chairing the LDC group. The first initiative, which is about resilient adaptation, is looking at how to mainstream adaptation into our development planning and look at how by 2050 we can come up with good planning that takes into account how to make investments which are resilient to climate change. Also, how to constitute a stock of knowledge and good experiences in order to ensure that we build capacity, which is oftentimes lacking. Many of us are capacity constrained, so that we are able to come up with a sound, coherent planning, which is conducive to investment, so that we can tap into the resources which are being mobilized by public sector and by private sector. So that's the adaptation part. The renewable energy part is looking at us and coming to the constatation that we are not only poor, but we are also energy poor. So how can we make use of this late commerce status and try to leapfrog by taking advantage, capitalizing on some of those reduced costs in renewable energies? So the objective of that second initiative is to try to ensure 100% access to energy in LDCs by 2030. 100% renewable energy production, because you can access energy, but that energy can be produced by fossil fuel. So 100% access to energy, 100% that energy can be produced by renewable sources by 2050, and by 2040, try to also arrive to 100% energy efficiency. So energy access, energy generated by renewables, and 100% energy efficiency. So this is a way that LDCs, instead of just pointing fingers, blaming others for the runaway climate change we are victim of, we have decided to take the leadership to really be at the mantle of climate action and try to propose good initiatives which are ready, which are just demanding adequate financing.
Well, thank you. That's fantastic. Yep. Well, actually, the number of people without access in the world to electricity is about 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion. It's an enormous number, and so to move toward greater access at the same time, trying to think about that in a sustainability way, really is going to take all of us to do that. And I'm at a university where we actually have projects in Africa, including in Rwanda. And it's an important and just thing to do, as I said in the introduction. This is a justice issue in part, but us helping and assisting in doing that as the United States of America, we think is also really important. So thank you for your work, and tell your colleagues we appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm going to be quoting you in coming weeks, because some of the words you said are very inspiring.
Thank you. So this is such a diverse panel now.
Yes, I agree.
To Mark Kiladucci, who's really the disaster man for the state of California and has had his hands full for the last few years. You've had some of the biggest years in the history of California. So much of it is related back to climate change, and so you wind up being here as part of this resilience discussion, but you've really lived and breathed this in 2017 and 2018 in ways you have never before in the history of the state. So we've got a little bit of time left. You can take your 5 minutes. We're not going to worry about the clock. 5, 6 minutes, and just talk about kind of how the state views resiliency. And if you might link it back to what Hink said this, in his opening comments about building back better.
Yeah.
How you do that.
Well, thank you, Governor. And I do agree. What a diverse panel. But it's interesting, as diverse as we are, we really all have a common set of, common theme, a common set of objectives. And it does speak to really the challenge that we have. Something we say here, that all disasters are local. It's where really our communities reside, people live, our economy gets driven. And building resiliency programs in at the local level are absolutely critical to be able to withstand the kind of activities that we have been seeing here, certainly in California over the last couple of years. All of us have similar challenges, whether you need good policy or political leadership, whether you need the ability to have the various demographics of a community understand the threat, or whether you need to have initiatives that need to be put forward. Building that at that local level and building a culture of preparedness is absolutely critical. In this case, building a culture of mitigation. We have seen this now, of course, time and time again. California is a very large place and a nation state, really, and we have a lot of threats here. The first thing is really kind of understanding the threat. What do communities, what does it mean to be resilient? And to be resilient, you need to understand really what your threat is. And understanding that threat, then you begin to build the policies around and priorities around how you're going to implement programs and initiatives to be able to buy down that risk. Unfortunately, disasters happen while you're planning. And as we see the business end of all the discussions that we're seeing in climate today, we know that having a very, very solid hazard mitigation plan, but a plan that is not just something that sits on the shelf. This is a living, working document that's public, private, non-governmental. It's the whole of community. And it's driven by all of the things that we talked about here: good policy, good priorities, good threat analysis and assessment, and initiatives that can move the the various aspects of that hazard mitigation plan forward. These are all very critical aspects to be able to ensure that a community can, in fact, withstand the intensities of these ongoing kind of events. They're not going to get any less. We know that. What we're going to see is more and more of these. And so the priorities need to change. Our leadership, our legislation, our funding needs to build into this culture of mitigation. I just signed the most comprehensive hazard mitigation plan in the state's history. This plan is designed and incorporates all of the various climate threats and climate actions that can tie to the various segments, and that it speaks to the various critical infrastructure sectors of our state, because that's going to help drive that initiative and will help our corporate leadership, our partners in the private sector, bond with us and come together with us to be able to buy down the risk. It has to be a partnership, and then work to ensure that hazard mitigation plan gets built into every community's general plan, so that land use planning is done in such a way to be able to build a resilient community.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And we did not save time for questions and answers, but that is just in part because we had such a fantastic and fascinating, really, group of people. So please give them a big thank you, a round of applause, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Give my own thanks to the panel and to the panelists. They really did outline what resilience means from a very wide range of perspectives. So we're going to have a panel in another few minutes after a presentation, a couple of speakers. We'll look at questions that surround funding, the types of initiatives that we talked about in this last panel, and other initiatives as well. But first, we're going to have a couple of presentations. In our next presentation, I'd like to introduce Eric Davidson. So Eric is he is the president of the American Geophysical Union. He's going to speak to us about the importance of connecting scientists and policymakers around adaptation and resilience. Eric, thank you.
It's my honor to be representing some 60,000 members of the American Geophysical Union, which is a global scientific society. Our mission is to promote discovery in earth and space science for the benefit of humanity. I've been very impressed at this summit, the number of times that speakers have spoken of their admiration for the science, their appreciation for how the hard work of scientists over the last several decades has allowed us to unequivocally show that human activity is changing the climate. Also mentioning the importance of science-based calculations of their emissions reductions that they need to adopt for their communities and their businesses. Although I found it somewhat curious that not many of us scientists have been on the podium. Perhaps that's because we have a reputation to be more analyzers of data or thinkers and not so much doers. But I'm here to tell you today that we are willing to take on some additional responsibilities. We need to continue to work on our climate models, our understanding of the global carbon cycle, the oceans, the forests, and so forth. But we're also ready to work at the local scale to help find solutions. I would say that we have a new generation of scientists. Actually, it's all age groups, but it's particularly our youngest scientists who are partnering with local community leaders, businesses, and citizens to jointly tackle the challenges of climate change. It's our youngest scientists who say, we're going into science not only because it's so cool and we love to become privy to the secrets of nature and how the world works and the universe works, but also because of that second part of our mission. They want to make a difference in the world to advance the benefit of humanity. And so to that end, the AGU partnered with the California Office of Planning and Research earlier this week to sponsor a Science to Action Day. AGU already has a program that we call the Thriving Earth Exchange, in which we partner scientists from local universities with local communities in a co-learning process to understand what are the major concerns of those communities, working with practitioners and local policymakers, and try to find the ways that we can apply the scientific method to help find solutions to some of their major concerns. And so we spent the day doing that. We have a resolution that we all signed, and we're ready to move ahead. It's going to take a bit more time. As you know, academia has other reward systems besides working with local communities. I see my slides just went away. Here they're back. I also want to make one more point. We scientists also have emissions. And everybody has been talking about their pledges, and we don't want to be left out either. As you can see on the right-hand side is the picture of our headquarters building in Washington, D.C., which we'll be reoccupying in a few weeks, newly renovated. It will be the first commercial-scale net zero energy building in Washington, D.C. It will have a public area for displaying all the systems that it uses, including the first time in North America for this application of plugging into the sewer system from DC that runs in front of the building. It's a 150-year-old sewer system, and using that as an energy heat exchanger for heating and cooling our building. You're welcome to come and visit us there to see how all that works. But mostly what I want to leave you with is that we're also ready to partner with you. With 60-some thousand members across the US and indeed across the globe, there's probably one of our members of the American Geophysical Union at a university near you. And if we can be involved in your projects to understand the concerns of your community and partner with you, we'd be delighted to do so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, Eric. Now we have an announcement. It will be Emily Maserati, and she is the founder and CEO of 427. Emily.
It fascinates me that climate scientists have been so consistently right for decades, and yet that climate science is very little used for real-world decision-making. There is uncertainty, of course. There's uncertainty, but it often pales in comparison to other data that we use for ongoing decisions. Economic forecasts, election polls, public transit timetables. We live in a world of uncertainty, and as humans, we're quite savvy at navigating this uncertainty to avoid paralysis. I founded 427 on the premise that climate data was highly relevant for businesses. Turning long-term climate projections developed by the brilliant scientists who are part of the AGU into economic signals is a requirement to enable companies to address climate change as a social and economic risk. To be fair, climate data is not exactly business-friendly. Terabytes of data, daily projections over dozens of indicators, millions of grid cells, hundreds of years of projections, 3 scenarios or more, not super easy. At 427, our mission is to bring science to markets, to enable investments in the parts of the world that need it most. We've spent the past 5 years developing a suite of applications that turns those long-term climate projections into a series of risk metrics that speak to business concerns. Will my facility flood? Will it be so hot that my employees can't work? Will there be enough water to run my manufacturing site? And let me stop here and say this. This is not a matter of the people against corporations. This is a matter of people and corporations working together to build resilience. We need businesses to be up and running after extreme weather events like Hurricane Florence, to provide the products and services and the jobs that we all rely on. Some corporations are already investing in resilience, and the most thoughtful ones, some of them here in the Bay Area, are actively seeking ways to invest in community resilience because they understand that their business and their employees are better served by collective action. And this is a powerful leverage that we need to build on. Corporation needs data, investors also need data. Building on our work with corporations, we've assembled a database with millions of sites around the world and performed a climate risk assessment for each of the sites, looking at things like flood risk, sea level rise, hurricanes and typhoons, drought, heat stress. And then we've scored each of those companies based on their exposure, based on the sites that they have globally. Comparable, instantly available climate risk metrics for thousands of companies globally. Let me tell you, this is something that investors find very interesting. Pension funds and asset managers with trillions of assets under management use this data to make decisions on which company to invest in and to engage and open a dialogue with the leadership of those corporations to encourage them to address those risks and become more resilient. We score 2,000 companies, and we can and will extend our approach to score even more companies. But there are millions of businesses out there, we'll never model them all. So we need to step up our effort to model the economic impacts of climate change. I'm here to announce a new initiative from 427 to model the macroeconomic risk of climate change. Our team is working on layering geospatial data with climate data and macroeconomic data to map the economic impacts of climate change at the city and regional level by sector for every country in the world. And we're a business, we're a fast-growing startup, but we're mission-driven, and we want this data to be used for good and to be accessible to those who need it most. We will work with nonprofit partners to ensure that local governments and developing countries around the world have access to this data, while we carry on our mission to deliver science-driven risk analytics and to catalyze climate adaptation and resilience investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That is a really big announcement and a big undertaking that can help a lot of us understand how to solve the problems in our future. So now it's my pleasure to get to introduce a person I know a little bit, but everybody that I know who knows her well just really respects her in such a significant way, including my son. Lynn Scarlett is the lead for the Global Climate Strategy for the Nature Conservancy, which has a global presence. It works around the world, and Lynn is really one of their global leaders in their strategy around climate and around resilience. So, Lynn Scarlett. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Nature Conservancy, I am really delighted to be here at this summit and this session. The Conservancy has projects around the world in resilience, in cities, countryside, coasts. We invest in oyster reef restoration, forest health, floodplain restoration. All of those projects reduce risks to people and nature. But we're really broadening how we think about resilience. We're asking ourselves, can we move beyond reducing risks to scoring gains? Can we invest not only in surviving, but in thriving? And to see how we're thinking about that, let us take a virtual journey to West Virginia, a state right next to where I grew up. It's coal country. West Virginia is facing significant challenges. It has a coal-based economy for the past 100 years. That economy is in steep decline. Now that is good news for the climate. but it brings significant challenges to the people of West Virginia, people who have had their ties, their communities, their links, their economy in that coal-based context for sometimes 100 years. West Virginia, like so many other communities across the country, also, of course, face the effects of a changing climate, unpredictable rain, high-intensity storm with flooding that results. So they face a lot of challenges, and we're asking ourselves, can we turn those challenges into opportunities? Can we take abandoned or reclaimed coal mine lands and transform them into responsible forestry and into places for solar energy development? Can we take those abandoned or reclaimed coal mine lands and turn them into economic opportunity, platforms for resilience, and platforms for climate solutions? So we've embarked on an effort to do just that, and what are our ingredients of success? First is to listen. Hard to go into coal country and talk about a climate agenda. And so we went in and listened, developed a sort of inner silence to hear what it was that people in West Virginia thought. And we learned from coal miners, from foresters, from recreation enthusiasts, from communities, from people in towns, that they love that environment, that they want a clean energy future. Then our next ingredient was to learn. Could we take those reclaimed coal mine lands that are unproductive, that have essentially no constructive purpose? Could we take those and through our science, through assessment, see if they would be suitable for solar energy development, for specialty agriculture, for reforestation? Those would in turn bring climate resilience, economic opportunity, and climate solutions, carbon sequestration. So we've embarked on that endeavor. But of course, the endeavor in West Virginia is not the only community or the only place which faces such challenges. And so we're also partnering, we're beginning to partner across the globe, and we're pleased to announce that we're a founding partner of the North American Resilient Infrastructure Consortium and Fund. Now that sounds great, but the really good news is that one of the partners is bringing $400 million to that fund to help advance resilience. Now, of course, critical to that success is the concept of partnerships, and we're bringing partnerships to West Virginia as well. Now, we have the conservation knowledge. We're building some knowledge about energy. But we teamed up with the Coalfield Development Corporation. It's a job training organization. We recognize that resilience and the economic futures and well-being of West Virginia depend upon giving a future to those folks. And so we've teamed up to them in job training, training in solar energy development, training in reforestry. So that's the future that we see before us for resilience. A big notion of resilience, economic opportunity, healthy lands and waters, thriving communities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn. So I used to be the guy at the podium when someone stood up on the stage to tell you were done speaking. And so I kind of know what an awful role that is to be out here and have somebody standing up there. Lynn Scarlett could go on again for a very long time, and we'd all benefit from hearing from her. Another cool panel coming up. Come on out to our next two panelists. And you're going to see again, they've given me some challenges in the introductions. Violet Shivutsu from the Hawaii Commission. Violet, come on out. If you take the middle seat, please.
Thank you.
Yes. And Benedict Lebanda. He is the Chief Executive Officer an environmental investment fund for Namibia. And so we're going to have a panel discussion. Yep. And this is really a privilege on my part as a moderator to be able to meet people backstage and get to know them. I actually lived in Zambia for 3 years, and we speak the same language. Benedict and I do. We won't do that right now, but it's a pretty cool thing just to be backstage and from such a close place. Violet, we heard in this previous panel about climate change and how it's affecting places from around the world, communities in what some people call the least developed countries. You've started this commission that is, or you are part of a commission, but you started the Huairou Community Resilience Fund. So it's this innovative model to fund community-led resilience initiatives. I just want you to spend a few minutes telling folks what it is that you're doing with that fund, why you founded it, and how it's working.
Thank you. So I come from a global grassroots women-led movement, and we are actively involved in issues of climate change, especially climate adaptation methods in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the Community Resilience Fund is a fund that we established from the genesis of having seen how different models of funding are working in our community. Usually, when we have problems of climate change, we are often treated as projects, as grassroots women, as beneficiaries and targets. And from our own experience, we have actually seen how our innovations have supported communities to come up with ways that are supporting communities to be resilient in issues of climate. We have seen how our leadership has been the strength to champion these activities in the communities. But we did not have consistency in how many donors or development partners and governments were funding. So we sat down and in 24 countries where we are working, we decided to start a fund that has 4 pillars. The first pillar is nurturing grassroots women leadership to be champions in activities related to climate change. The second pillar was to ensure that we were able to support our innovations and grow our innovations and strengthen them and expand them to be to expand to other communities and even within our communities and even showcase to governments. And the third pillar was networking and building alliances, which actually was to nurture how we are working with our governments among ourselves, because sometimes community groups were working in silos. We wanted to change this perspective of how people treat communities like we cannot work as one group. We are fragmented. So we worked on that with in the same pillar. And the fourth one was to ensure that we were actively participating in influencing policy, advocating to ensure implementation of policy. So it had 4 pillars. These, if I give examples on how the Community Resilience Fund has worked, to just show the critical mass that we have, in Nicaragua, we have 1,200 cooperatives of grassroots women producers that are members of this fund that have come together to establish this fund, and they're working in the same way. We have in Philippines, where we have, it's a hurricane bronze zone, and we have 30,000 grassroots women from urban poor community that have come together and are also championing this Community Resilience Fund. And in Africa, where we have drought and floods and other things, including natural resource, that grassroots women have also come together. So basically, this fund is transforming how communities, especially grassroots women that have innovations that we have learned from for a long time, are perceived. We are able to engage our governments and do some activities like, for example, mapping, which is a basic way of researching or surveying around the issue that is affecting us in the community, do validation meetings, feedback meetings with our government, which enables us to set priorities. And it actually really positions us differently, because when you are invited to a government meeting, you don't have the power to change priorities like when you invite governments to our meetings when you have your own resources. So it really transforms. We also are able to Look at what innovations, for example, in my community right now, we are looking at issues of soil management and conservation of water catchment areas. So we prioritize this to happen for this year up to some. So we can actually prioritize what activities do we want to scale using this fund. Still in the same fund, we have women, for example, women farmers. I'm a farmer. Sometimes you want to do farming and you don't have money that you can start with. I can go to my fund, Community Resilience Fund, and get small loan that is very flexible with small money that I put in as an interest, which continues to leverage this fund. So it's flexible. It enables us to convene and discuss as grassroots women, because sometimes we are limited when we want to sit together and develop concrete, common message that we want to advocate against policies that are not working for the people. So basically, this is what this fund is, and maybe I can add more.
Well, no, I don't think...
3 minutes are not over.
No. I lived along and I travel enough in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, to know it's almost rude to cut you off, and I apologize, but they're telling me I have to go on. And so, Mr. Labanda, this is now about Namibia and what is one of the first financial institutions under the Green Climate Fund. So I'm sure there are a lot of people here who know about the Green Climate Fund, but also may not have followed its implementation in Namibia. You're also doing economic reform at the same time. So how does the functioning of the Green Climate Fund and your utilization of it fit in with the economic reform that you're doing in Namibia?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I'm super excited to be here. Namibia is a net carbon sink country, but we've prioritized climate change mitigation as an opportunity to move our economic growth towards a low carbon economy and climate resilient pathways. We've identified that to do that, we need to set some targets. As a government, we have identified in numbers that by 2030, we have to reduce our greenhouse gases emission by 89%. So that's huge. You know, a bigger share of that is coming from renewable energy, which will make up by about 70% of energy generation. When it comes to reducing deforestation, we'll be reducing deforestation by 85%, you know, year 2030. We'll also be restoring grasslands covering about, you know, 15 million hectares. I don't know that in acres. We'll be also be doing a lot of waste management. You know, our municipality waste management and sludge will be converted to energy and fertilizer, and we're targeting 60% of that. To comprehensive, you know, implement such targets, you need financing. So I'm glad to announce that the country has just completed environmental fiscal reforms, and in those reforms we have introduced environmental taxes on carbon and pollutant products. And those proceeds that are collected are ring-fenced for investment, you know, in different areas. That is climate-smart agriculture, small grids, you know, for local communities, water conservation, nature-based tourism. And we estimate that, you know, about 15 million US dollars per annum will be collected for such investments. And by 2020, we estimate about 30 million US dollars to be collected for such investment. And this is ring-fenced, is for financing projects that really make a difference, you know, at a local level. Our first program that we're targeting is the Community-Based Natural Resource Program, which covers about 200,000 square kilometers, about roughly 100,000 miles in diameter.
Or miles.
And it is inhabited by 300,000 people. So we'll be securing livelihood and enhancing capacity resilience capacity of more than 300,000 people. So what we're targeting in those areas, we're targeting more of creating value addition to their natural resource management. Yeah. And you'll be doing these through blended financing mechanism. That is, concessional loans, grants, de-risking instruments such as guarantees, interest subsidies, etc. And we've estimated that in the first 3 years of implementation, we'll create about 8,000 jobs, and it's green jobs for that matter. So I think these are part of domestic resource mobilization strategies that the country has pursued in order to leverage more from private sector investment as well as multilateral institutions.
Again, fantastic, and we're out of time, but give him a round of applause. So thank you both for all your work. That's all the time we have, and we should do a proper greeting, so nitamezi shangwe. My hand there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
We're going to have a couple of closing speakers now, and it's my pleasure to introduce both of them. We begin today with, I think this is, yes, Bob Lohman, the Deputy Prime Minister of Vanuatu. Mr. Lohman, is Mr. Lohman here? Come on out. I didn't get to meet him yet. Pardon? Lothman. Mr. Lothman, please. Thank you for being here, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, please allow me to express our deepest gratitude to Governor Jerry Brown of California for the kind invitation of my delegation to attend this Global Action Summit. As a small island developing state, we are amongst those nations that are on the front line facing the adverse impacts of human-induced climate change and natural disasters, such as volcanoes and tsunamis. Our challenge going forward is how to build resilience to secure our long-term future. Building resilience will depend on the government and the society's ability to adapt to changes, anticipate what might happen next, and how climate shocks are absorbed. This year, my government is currently responding to 11,000 internally displaced people that are affected by cyclone eruption in one of the islands, 3,000 of whom are school children. This is a complex challenge. Being resilient will require long-term, genuine, and innovative partnerships. Climate change has caused extreme weather events in our country. We are faced with severe tropical cyclones, sea level rise, coral bleaching, and ocean acidification. This affects our economy, our land, our culture, and our tourism industry. We are here to remind us all of the urgency that this fight and this conference demonstrated. We need to continue ramp up the momentum. Science tells us we must peak global greenhouse gases emission and rapidly move towards net zero emission if we are to have even a chance to realize the critical 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature target set out by the Paris Agreement. We need to see more ambition on climate action across the world. Though we are falling short to meet the ambition set out in the Paris Agreement, the opening of the plenary yesterday revealed that there are positive steps taken already by governments, private sectors, and civil society. We need to continue this commitment and actions to build a sustainable future for all. As part of Vanuatu's endeavor to be responsible global citizen, we are committed to doing our part in contributing to the ambition required from us collectively. Our National Sustainable Development Plan, our National Energy Roadmap, and our National Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction Policy form the basis of our contribution to the necessary global aggregate climate action. These policies have enabled us to invest in clean energy and sustainable infrastructure. Our contribution is small in global scale, but it is an important part of the global effort to reduce greenhouse gases. We therefore call on the leadership of all countries and major cities, particularly the major developing and developed countries, to ensure that the ambitions set out in the Paris Agreement are implemented. Backsliding is not an option. We need everyone around the table. We urge major players in this process to re-engage and recommit for the sake of our common good. We insist that climate action needs adequate, reliable, long-term finance support, especially for vulnerable nations like mine, which face the unique and unprecedented challenge of lifting our people out of poverty without relying on fossil fuels amidst worsening climate conditions. Vanuatu embraces the vision of global climate action that actively promotes human rights, gender equality, and sustainable development for all parties. Climate change is a universal problem. No country, small or big, rich or poor, is immune to impacts of climate change. This is why it is important that we all work together in a spirit of partnership and solidarity to resolve this natural phenomenon that is risking our very existence in this planet Earth. It is small countries like mine that suffer most to the impact of climate change. We have been encouraged by the determination shown by so many at this global climate action summit here in San Francisco, and we need to increase the ambition further. Our children are counting on us for a secure future. If we don't act now, when will be the right time? Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all. God bless you all.
Fantastic. It was fantastic, Deputy Prime Minister. I happen to be fortunate enough to be at the Climate Accords in Paris and to be badged by the State Department to talk about the role of subnationals in meeting climate goals, but I thought the island nations had such a powerful voice there and really have an existential threat. It's been mentioned here once or twice, but their existential threat actually is visited upon them sooner than ours. And I really appreciate that they have a voice and that they're here and that they are participating, and especially Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister Luffman. Our closing remarks today are the Right Honorable Mark Field. He has the longest title of anybody I've introduced today, so come on out, Mark. He's the MP and Minister of the State for Asia and Pacific at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office from the United Kingdom. We are really fortunate to have Mark Field as our closer today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're almost there. So, Bill, thank you very much indeed for your kind words. Listen, there have been some fantastic contributions to this little debate. I know we've been rattling through, but one of the biggest things I go home to London with is just a recognition of how working together across the globe we can make a real difference. I needn't tell you, having just seen and heard the contribution from the Deputy Prime Minister of Vanuatu, for a country for which climate change is literally existential, that this is no abstract threat. This year, people around the world have suffered unprecedented heat waves, wildfires, and monsoon rains. All, I think, are examples of the sorts of extreme weather events that even run-of-the-mill scientists will confirm are becoming ever more frequent and more severe due to climate change. We need to reduce the man-made causes of climate change, and we need to keep pressing ahead with that. But with the impacts of climate change already being felt, we also, I think, have to start to adapt and build resilience to those changes that are already taking place. According to the World Bank, 100 million people across our planet could be pushed into poverty by climate change primarily within the next decade or so. So the need is urgent, and failure to act now will hit the poorest countries and the most vulnerable people most of all. And in the interconnected world, which all of us agree we live in, it will affect us all in one way or another. Regional climate disasters have global impacts, and that's why the UK is leading work on resilience at the UN Secretary-General's Climate Summit in 2019. We want that summit to mark a step change in the global approach to climate change. And our aim is to ensure we can all better anticipate climate change extremes, to adapt to them, but also to absorb their impacts through effective disaster response. Now, to achieve those goals, collectively we need to work across the globe to reduce exposure to disasters and build climate resilience into all of our economies by factoring our changing climate into investment decisions at home and abroad. My own country is already working internationally to try and make this happen. We feel that since 2011, we've already helped 47 million people across the world cope with the effects of climate change through enhanced adaptation schemes. We're supporting the Climate Leadership in Cities program, which is one that has involved cities signing up to the C40 group, and we will fund 15 city-level climate action plans across Latin America and Asia in the coming years. Households in many target areas have seen their incomes rise by about $200 a year, and early warning systems have helped evacuate more than 12,000 people ahead of rising floodwater. I was recently at the Pacific Island Forum, in fact only 10 days ago out in Nauru. Few of us, I think, are impacted as directly by climate change as the people of the Pacific Islands. Vanuatu is one, I'm afraid, only of many sovereign states in that boat. Their very existence is under threat from the seas creeping up to their shores. Their plight, I think, is one of the world's most tangible examples of the security threat that climate change can also cause. And that's why we also support the South Pacific Regional Environmental Programme, and why, from the UK's perspective, we expand our domestic presence in the region with new high commissions in Tonga, Vanuatu, and Samoa. Climate change will be an increasingly important part of our work in each of those 3 new missions. But all countries also need to do what they can to build resilience within their borders. Again, for our own part, within the UK, our own Environment Agency is working with local partners to try to address coastal and inland flood risks, and we hope, even within the boundaries of the United Kingdom, to reduce the risk posed to some 300,000 homes by 2021. So our recently published National Adaptation Plan requires all public bodies to report on how they're adapting to current and future climate impacts. Later this year, we shall be launching a revised set of climate projections through to the end of this century, which we hope will make climate resilience a more important day-to-day factor. Let me close, if I may, because I know many of you have got other things you want to go to. And as I say, I think this has been a really fantastic and very varied debate, but I think that variety shows the richness of the work that has already been done, but also what we need to do for the future. I think from emergency planning to infrastructure investment, from adaptations in agriculture and land use to risk financing, there are countless other areas where we can all work together. This is, as has been stated so many times by speakers on this platform this afternoon, this is a global challenge requiring global solutions and global cooperation. My own country stands ready, committed to building with ambition and really with action. We invite national and subnational, or perhaps I should say supranational governments, as well as the private sector and civil society, to join us in making the global UN summit next year the success it so richly deserves to be. Galvanizing action to increase resilience in the countries and communities that are most affected by climate change. Thank you.
So that concludes our program for today. Thank you so much for coming to listen to such an important thing. We talk about climate change and climate action. If we only talk about mitigation, we're only playing half of the game. So this is really important that you were here, and we just appreciate it. Thank you. God bless.